I've always been a bit of a drifter, never really fitting in anywhere. Name's Ryan, 33 years old, born and raised in Little Rock, Arkansas. But lately, I've been feeling like I needed a change of scenery, something drastic. That's how I ended up in Ketchikan, a small fishing town near the Tongass National Forest in southern Alaska. It all started about a month ago. I was sitting at the White Water Tavern back home, nursing my third whiskey of the night, when I overheard some fellas talking about a cabin for rent up in Alaska. It was cheap, isolated, and came with no questions asked. Perfect for someone looking to disappear for a while. Now, I ain't running from the law or anything. I just needed some time to sort myself out, you know? So I made some calls, packed up what little I had, and before I knew it, I was on a plane headed north. The journey was long and tiring, but finally, I made it to Ketchikan. It was late afternoon when I arrived, and I decided to skip going into town. The cabin I'd rented was supposedly on the outskirts, right on the edge of the forest. A place called Whispering Pines. After walking for a good 30 minutes, I finally spotted a cluster of cabins. There were about 15 of them, which was more than I'd expected. So much for complete isolation. I found cabin number 5 and started walking towards it. As I approached, I noticed the other residents stopping what they were doing and staring at me. It was unsettling, to say the least. I reached for the doorknob, eager to get inside and away from those prying eyes. "Hold up there, stranger," a gruff voice called out behind me. I turned to see an old man approaching, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Who might you be?" I put on my friendliest smile and extended my hand. "Howdy, I'm Ryan. Just rented this cabin for a spell. Hoping to do some writing. Clear my head, you know." The old man didn't take my hand. Instead, he crossed his arms and frowned. Funny, don't remember old Bill mentioning renting out his cabin to anyone. I lowered my hand, trying to keep my cool. "Well, I rented it through an agency. Didn't deal with the owner directly." The old man grunted. "Maybe this ain't the best place for writers. I hear the town's got some nice places for rent, cheap too." I was starting to get annoyed, but I kept my tone friendly. "Appreciate the suggestion, but I've already paid for this place. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's been a long trip." Before he could say anything else, I stepped inside and shut the door. Through the window, I could see him glowering at me before he finally turned and walked away. I sighed and dropped my bag on the floor. This wasn't exactly the warm welcome I'd been hoping for, but I wasn't about to let one grumpy old man ruin my plans. I decided to take a nap and deal with everything else later. I woke up to the sound of knocking. Groggy and disoriented, I checked my watch. 7 p.m. I'd been out for a few hours. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. I opened the door to find the old man from before. Before I could say anything, he spoke up. "Name's Ben Walker. Look, we got off on the wrong foot earlier, but I meant what I said. This ain't a place you should stay." I leaned against the door frame, crossing my arms. "Look, Mr. Walker, I appreciate your concern, but I ain't here to cause trouble. Just want some peace and quiet." Ben lowered his voice to a whisper. "These woods, they belong to him, and he don't like newcomers." "Him? Who are you talking about?" "Believe me, you don't want to meet him. Many have disappeared who chose to stay and disobey his rules," Ben replied, his eyes darting around nervously. "Now, I've heard my fair share of local legends and ghost stories back in Arkansas. Hell, we've got the Boggy Creek Monster and the Fook Monster. But something in Ben's voice, the fear in his eyes, It made me pause. Still, I wasn't about to let some superstition scare me off. "I appreciate the warning, Mr. Walker, but I ain't got nowhere else to go right now." "I'm staying." Ben sighed, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "He already knows you're here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "These are the rules for staying here. Read 'em. Follow 'em like your life depends on it. 'Cause it does." I took the paper, a knot forming in my stomach. When I looked back up, Ben was already walking away, disappearing into the growing darkness. I closed the door and unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The rules were written in a messy scrawl. Rule 1. Never leave your cabin after 11 p.m. Rule 2. If you feel a presence in your room at night, do not move or acknowledge it. Pretend to sleep. It should leave after 2 minutes. Rule 3. If you see skinless corpses hanging from trees while in the woods, do not scream. Slowly back away while looking down until you can no longer see them. Rule 4. Never insult or taunt him. It's the last thing you'll do. Rule 5. If you hear heavy breathing behind you while alone, do not turn around. Close your eyes and count to 10. Everything should be fine after that. I read the rules over and over, trying to convince myself it was all some elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear in Ben's eyes had been too real. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside had me on edge. But nothing happened. No presence, no breathing, nothing. As the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, I finally drifted off into an uneasy sleep. I woke up a few hours later to the sound of voices outside. Peering through the window, I saw Ben coming out of his cabin with a woman and a little girl. I stepped outside, squinting in the bright Alaskan sun. Ben spotted me and waved me over. "You survived!" he exclaimed, a mix of surprise and relief in his voice. "Did he visit you last night?" I shook my head. "Nah, quiet as a church mouse all night." Ben nodded approvingly. "Good, good." "Well, as long as you follow the rules, you should be fine." He gestured to the woman and girl beside him. "This here's my daughter Sarah and my granddaughter Annie." I tipped an imaginary hat. "Pleasure to meet y'all. I'm Ryan." Sarah gave me a tight smile, while little Annie hid behind her mother's legs, peeking out at me curiously. The next few days passed without incident. I started to settle into a routine, almost letting my guard down. But I never forgot about the rules. They were always there in the back of my mind. One morning, I noticed I was running low on firewood. The cabin got mighty cold at night, so I decided to head into the forest to chop some. It was a bright, clear day as I set out with my axe and skid. After about 20 minutes of walking, I found a good tree to cut down. It took me the better part of an hour to fell it. I ain't exactly a lumberjack. As I was loading the log onto my skid, I felt a sudden, intense sensation of being watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But then I heard it. A twig snapping behind me, followed by deep, raspy breathing. My heart skipped a beat in panic as I remembered rule number 5. With my heart pounding in my chest, I squeezed my eyes shut and started counting. 1, 2, 3. The breathing got louder, closer. 4, 5, 6. I could feel it right behind me now, its hot breath on my neck. 7, 8, 9. Everything went silent. 10. I opened my eyes, my whole body trembling. The forest was quiet again, no sign of whatever had been there. I grabbed my skid and hightailed it back to the cabin, not stopping once to look back. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the incident in my mind. What would have happened if I'd turned around? What was that thing? Suddenly, I felt it. A presence in the room. The air grew heavy, oppressive. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something. But I remembered rule number 2. I closed my eyes and forced my breathing to remain steady, pretending to be asleep. I could hear it moving around the room, its footsteps heavy and uneven. It came closer to the bed, and I could feel its gaze upon me. It took everything I had not to flinch, not to open my eyes. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a couple of minutes, the presence retreated. I heard the cabin door open and close, and then silence. I didn't sleep a wink that night. The next few months passed in a blur of fear and vigilance. I had a few more encounters, another visit at night, a couple more incidents in the forest, but I always followed the rules, and I always survived. But as time went on, I noticed a change in the other residents. There was a tension in the air, a sense of dread that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Everyone seemed to be avoiding me, even Ben, who had become something of a friend. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I cornered Ben one afternoon as he was chopping wood outside his cabin. "All right, Ben, what's going on?" I demanded. "Y'all are acting like there's a fox in the hen house. What ain't you telling me?" Ben lowered his axe, his face lined with worry. There's one more rule I didn't tell you about." My stomach dropped. "What rule?" Ben sighed heavily. "Every year, just 5 days before Christmas, he comes to the village and chooses one person, takes him away. The rest of us are left alone as long as we follow the rules." I felt the blood drain from my face. And let me guess, most folks are hoping it'll be me this year? Ben couldn't meet my eyes, which was answer enough. "Well, to hell with that," I exclaimed. "I'm getting out of here. Y'all can keep your creepy woods and your monster." "It's no use," Ben said, his voice resigned. "He's already marked you. The moment you spent a night here, you became his. You try to leave now, and you're just hastening your death. Why do you think I tried so hard to get you to leave that first day?" I stormed back to my cabin, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. I'd come here to escape my problems, not to be sacrificed to some backwoods monster. I spent the next few days in a panic, boarding up my windows and barricading my door. I sat on my bed, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand, waiting for this thing to show up. It was on the 3rd night that I heard it. A heart-wrenching cry coming from outside. I recognized Sarah's voice, wailing in anguish. Despite my fear, I found myself unbarricading the door and rushing outside. I saw Ben holding Sarah, who was on her knees in the snow, sobbing uncontrollably. Little Annie was nowhere to be seen. "It took her," Sarah cried. "It took my baby." In that moment, something snapped inside me. I'd come here to run away from my problems, to hide from the world. But now, an innocent child had been taken, and I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. "I'll get her back," I heard myself say. Before anyone could stop me, I was running towards the forest, towards the place where Ben had once mentioned seeing the skinless corpses. I could hear Ben shouting behind me, "It's no use! He'll take you too!" But I didn't stop. I kept running, my lungs burning in the cold air. As I reached the clearing Ben had described, I saw it. A massive tree, its branches adorned with 3 skinless, bloodless corpses. The sight nearly made me lose my lunch, but I forced myself to keep looking. And there it was. The thing from the forest. It was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with long, spindly limbs and 7 or 8 tentacle-like appendages, each ending in a razor-sharp blade. In one of its massive hands, it held little Annie, who was mercifully unconscious. Without thinking, I shouted, "Let her go, you coward! You're nothing but a parasite, feeding on these helpless people." The creature's head snapped towards me, its black eyes boring into mine. It dropped Annie and started moving towards me, its tentacles writhing in anticipation. I realized too late that I'd broken rule number 4. Never insult or taunt him. One of its tentacles lashed out, faster than I could react. I felt a searing pain across my arm as the blade sliced through my jacket and into my flesh. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling hard on my back. In an instant, the creature was upon me, its tentacles wrapped around my arms and legs, holding me in place. Its face loomed over mine, and I saw its mouth open, revealing row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. This was it. This was how I was going to die. In that moment, I thought of all the things I'd run away from back in Arkansas, all the people I'd let down, all the responsibilities I'd shirked. And for what? To end up as monster food in the Alaskan wilderness? As the creature's jaws descended towards my face, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the anger, all the regret I'd been holding back. I let it all out in one primal scream. And then something impossible happened. My body began to change. I felt myself growing, my muscles expanding, my skin taking on a greenish hue. The creature's tentacles snapped as my body grew too large for them to contain. I grabbed the creature by its tentacles and yanked it towards me. Its eyes, once filled with malice, now showed fear. Good. It was about time it knew how that felt. I slammed it into the ground, again and again, each impact accompanied by the sickening crunch of breaking bones. I tore its limbs from its body, ripped its tentacles off one by one. By the time I was done, there was nothing left but a twisted, mangled corpse. As the rage subsided, I felt myself shrinking back to my normal size. I stood there, panting, surrounded by the destruction I'd caused. Annie lay nearby, still unconscious, but unharmed. I picked her up gently and made my way back to the cabins. As I approached, I saw Ben and Sarah rushing towards me. Sarah took Annie from my arms, sobbing with relief. Ben looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" was all he managed to say. I shook my head. "It doesn't matter. She's safe now, and you don't have to worry about that thing anymore." I quickly went back to my cabin and packed up my few belongings. I'd managed to keep my condition a secret for so long, but as I was leaving, Ben stopped me. "Where will you go?" he asked. I shrugged. "Don't know. Somewhere else that needs help, I reckon. There's always someone who needs saving." Ben nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, if you ever need a place to lay low, you know where to find us. And this time, there won't be any rules to follow." I smiled, touched by the offer. But I knew I couldn't stay. My life was on the road now, always moving, always running. But maybe, just maybe, I could use this curse of mine to do some good along the way. As I drove away from Whispering Pines, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. I'd come to Alaska to escape my problems, to run away from who I was. Instead, I'd been forced to confront the very thing I'd been running from. And in doing so, I'd found a purpose. The road stretched out before me, leading to who knows where. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. As I drove, my mind wandered back to the events of the past few months. The rules, the fear, the constant vigilance, it all seemed like a bad dream now. but the scars on my arm and the tattered remains of my clothes were very real reminders of what had happened. I thought about the other residents of Whispering Pines. How long had they lived under that creature's tyranny? How many people had been taken over the years? The thought made my blood boil, and I had to take a few deep breaths to calm myself. It was strange. For years, I'd seen my condition as a curse, something to be hidden, controlled, suppressed. But back there in the forest, it had saved not just my life, but little Annie's too. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a gift if used right. As the sun began to set, I realized I had no idea where I was going. I'd been so focused on getting away that I hadn't given much thought to my destination. I spotted a small diner just off the highway and decided to pull over. Maybe some food would help clear my head. The diner was nearly empty when I walked in. A bell jingled above the door, and a tired-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "Seat yourself, hun," she said, gesturing to the empty booths. I slid into a booth near the back, my eyes automatically scanning for exits, a habit I'd picked up over the years. The waitress, whose name tag read Doris, shuffled over with a menu. "What'll it be, sugar?" she asked, pen poised over her notepad. "Just coffee for now, ma'am," I replied. "And maybe some information, if you don't mind." Doris raised an eyebrow. "Information? What kind of information you looking for in these parts?" I hesitated, not sure how to phrase my question without sounding crazy. "I'm looking for places that might need help. You know, towns with problems. The kind of problems most folks might not believe." Doris's face changed, her tired eyes suddenly sharp and alert. She glanced around the empty diner before leaning in close. "You one of them hunters?" she whispered. I blinked, confused. "Hunters?" She nodded. "You know, the folks who deal with things. Things most people pretend don't exist." For a moment, I was speechless. Was she saying what I thought she was saying? I guess you could say that," I finally managed. Doris straightened up, a small smile on her face. "Well, why didn't you say so? Hang on a sec." She disappeared into the back, returning a few moments later with a steaming mug of coffee and a folded piece of paper. "Here," she said, sliding the paper across the table. "My cousin lives in a town about 300 miles east of here. Says they've been having some unusual problems lately. Might be worth checking out." I unfolded the paper. It contained an address and a few cryptic notes. Midnight howls. Missing pets. Don't go out after dark. I looked up at Doris, who was watching me with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I'll look into it." She nodded, relief evident on her face. "You be careful out there. And if you ever pass through again, coffee's on the house." As I drove away from the diner, the piece of paper tucked safely in my pocket, I couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose. Maybe this was why I'd been given this power. Not to run away, but to run towards the things that go bump in the night. I thought about the rules I'd left behind in Whispering Pines. They'd been restrictions, meant to keep people in line, to keep them afraid. But maybe what I needed weren't rules to follow, but guidelines to live by. I started making a mental list. 1. Use your strength to protect the weak. 2. Face your fears instead of running from them. 3. There's always a choice between right and easy. 4. Sometimes the real monsters are the ones that look human. 5. Never stop trying to do good, even when it seems hopeless. As the miles rolled by, I felt a change coming over me. I wasn't just Ryan from Arkansas anymore, the guy always looking for an escape. I I was something more now, something that could make a difference. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when I saw the sign, "Welcome to Millhaven. Population 1,203. Enjoy your stay." I pulled over to the side of the road and took a deep breath. Whatever was happening in this town, whatever was causing those midnight howls and making pets disappear, I was ready for it. As I drove into town, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't running away from something. I was running towards it.